IoT Unplugged, where we talk to industry leaders, innovators, and major players in the Internet of Things, bringing you the best and latest insights. Tune in to learn more. In this episode, I'm talking to Vincent Lomba, Chief Technical Security Officer at Alcatel-Lucent Enterprise. We talk about the latest cybersecurity regulations, more specifically looking at regulations for cloud computing and what businesses need to be aware of. Hi Vincent, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hello.
Could you start us off by providing a quick introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. So, Vincent Lomba, I'm a Chief Product Security Officer for Alcatel-Lucent Enterprise, and my job is to ensure that all the product that my company is delivering follows the rules in terms of cybersecurity, to ensure that our end customer are the expected level in terms of by default security. I'm also doing security audit. I'm an auditor for ISO 27001. And I'm performing regularly such kind of things, should it be for our suppliers, but also internal as well. We are certified, and I'm in charge of ensuring that that certification applies. And last, I'm also driving the company towards the compliance in terms of cybersecurity regulations that applies now in EU, but also in the rest of the world. We are selling everywhere in the world, so we have to ensure that all what we are delivering, the way we deliver it, and our go-to-market is in line with and is compliant.
Great, thank you. And please do provide a quick introduction to the company.
Yes, Alcatel-Lucent Enterprise is a company that is delivering product for communication in different flavors, should it be by cloud, so with a unified communication in the cloud delivered directly to the end customer, or in, I would say, more traditional on-premise. We do have a lot of equipment on-premise still running, and especially for enterprises and organizations that have sensitive information or want to protect themselves from the outside. And last but not least, we are also delivering infrastructure network product to ensure that we interconnect all the equipment, all the applications through a dedicated infrastructure that we are delivering.
Great, thank you for that introduction, Vincent. So earlier you mentioned part of your responsibility, or one of your responsibilities, I should say, being compliance with regulation. Of course, you also alluded to so many different regulations, so many different parts of the world are sort of figuring out how they should approach cybersecurity. Could you provide an overview of some of the regulations that are out there at the moment and what they're seeking to address?
Yes, and I will try to give a little bit of flavor, not only for EU, which is our primary focus, but also the rest of the world. To start with, in EU, so we have the NIS2 that has been enforced end of last year, the Network Infrastructure Security version 2, that affects a lot of organizations across all European Union. More or less 400,000 entities are to be compliant with that regulation. We are directly concerned by this regulation, so we have to comply. But more importantly, all the customers that we are delivering to are also to be compliant. So we help them to comply with this regulation. This one is not the only one in EU. There is an additional one that is enforced since about a week now, called DORA. DORA for bank and insurance is what we call a super NIS2, so a much more enforced and stringent regulation to ensure that those kind of organizations do apply security measures at a very high level, and we understand the rationale behind. If I focus a little bit in France, and I will go outside of France, of course, we do have specific regulation called military programmatic law, loi de programmation militaire, that is very specific to France, and that applies to what is identified as critical entities. And they do have to apply, again, specific measures. They do have to demonstrate to the authorities that they have put in place such kind of measures. For example, all the hospital, energy, transportation do have to comply with not only defense, but also all the critical industries. To continue this landscape, healthcare. So healthcare in France is HDS, which will in some month be extended to all entities, to healthcare entities across EU. So there is a project on that. It's not yet finalized, but there is a project to expand this regulation. And then again, coming back in European Union, we will have the RED directive, which affects all the radio-based equipment, so the Wi-Fi, our smartphones, all what is using by over-the-air transmission will be affected by this regulation, focusing now on the cybersecurity. If I try to go outside of EU, we do have the Executive Order 14028 in the US that has been voted by Biden's president 2 years ago, and which is requesting more or less the equivalent as the NIS2, but for specific vertical sector in the US. And this one is very important because that's one of the first law or executive order in that case that is focusing only on cybersecurity, which is the end of this amendment or this executive order. Covering rest of the world in Asia, well, we can start by Singapore. Singapore to have a specific laws named the CSA, S for standing for Singapore, of course, that is requesting more or less similar things as NIS2. It's always the same story, by the way, and we could elaborate a little bit on that. Why not a single regulation across the world? That could be the case because at the end of the day, they are more or less converging into the same kind of measures. Same for Australia. We have seen also in Japan a specific one. And I would say that covers, well, not all of them, but most of them. And to end up with that, specific regulation per vertical sectors. Again, in the US, we have the HIPAA for the healthcare, like the HDS that we have in France. We have the FERPA, which is still in the US for education. And then we have specific regulation to be able to sell to specific markets, like ENS in Spain, well, we have the equivalent as well in the Nordics. I can't remember the name right now, but again, well, if I try to summarize, there is about 40 regulation that are already enforced in the world, roughly speaking, and more to come, because we are just starting. We are just at the starting of all those kind of regulations.
I mean, why don't we pick up on this point you made about there being so many different regulations and whether there's a need for having so many different regulations? What are your thoughts on that?
The point is that regulations are leveraging on the local laws, and this is where this is tricky to try to have a single view on that. Some of the regulation can be contradictory with some others, and that's exactly why having a single regulation is not that easy. If I take the recent example of the NIS2, which is a directive, so it has to be locally transposed in each of the state members' law, it has roughly taken about 2 years to be able to do so, and it was in the landscape of EU, which is normally with similar kind of laws. So this is not that feasible to say, okay, NIS2 will apply in the US because the US law doesn't rely on the same kind of principle, global principle, same as for the Asian countries as well. So different in the culture, different in the request, and potentially in contradiction with already enforced laws. That's why it's very, very difficult.
Interesting. So it sounds like you are kind of saying not only region-wise, but also I imagine industry vertical-wise that there is a need to have nuanced regulation.
And yes, for the vertical segment, it's a little bit different because they are governed differently, not only by laws, but also by dedicated standards, focusing, for example, transportation. Recently, they have introduced for transportation, led by the IACS organization that rely on ONU. They have put in place a new kind of requirements. This is not as such a regulation. This is a standard. So it's not by law mandatory, but if you want to be insured when you are operating a boat freight company, you have to comply with that standard. And that is an harmonized standard. And then there is one single one for all the world, which simplifies a lot the way to be compliant and to be able to sell to that kind of market. And this one specifically has been put in place last year, mid of last year, in August, if I'm not mistaken, requesting for all the new boats to embed security measures by default for all the equipments that are relying on the network infrastructure. So that's pretty new, and that's I would say anticipating all the new technologies as well. We know that more and more there would be unmanned boats, so nobody on board, nobody to operate the boat locally, but fully remotely. And that's why they needed to ensure that all the technologies that would be put in place into those unmanned boats and ships would have to be safe, would have to be secure, would have to be operating all of the time, etc., etc.
Okay, so now that we have that overview, why don't we talk about regulation more specifically in the context of cloud computing? What what regulation do those operating in the space need to be aware of and need to know about?
Today, there is, well, I would say two families of regulation and standards. The first thing is that it has been very difficult to impose to the cloud computing specifically a dedicated regulation. How it works today, most of the states or the state members of EU and that applies more or less similarly across the world, they have decided to have one global regulation that governs all the cybersecurity requirements, whatever the implementation, cloud or on-prem or whatever. Now, if we focus on what is requested for cloud environment specifically, it's more about things that protect the states, not the technologies, but the states against what could happen from the external. Be sure that the solutions are fully managed locally, etc., etc. Taking a very concrete example in France, there is a specific standard that is named SecNum Cloud, and that is not mandatory but highly recommended. And more or less, it's the way it applies in the rest of the world as well. So they say you are highly advised to follow this standard, but you are not constrained to adopt it and to prove that you and to demonstrate to authorities that you have put in place all these kind of security measures. So it's more about a generic approach. Again, NIS2 being one of them, but not the only one. Then complemented by dedicated standards to be able to reach the expected level. So on one side, regulation say you must be safe, you must be protected, you must have an organization that governs internally your cybersecurity, and then you could rely on that. So this is not how to say from now at least, cloud computing in general does have to comply with certain standard to protect the states, not the technology again, but is advised to rely on existing standard. One of the exception to that, that is very closely related to the cloud computing, it's about the AI technology or technologies. There is several. Unlike purely cloud, where AI does entirely rely on the cloud, it's a mandatory thing, at least for the training and then for delivering the services down to the consumer or the enterprises. Here, there is strict regulation that applies to limit the usage of the AI, not the cloud computing by itself, but the way the service is delivered relying on the cloud is strictly governed by law. And in the case of the EU, it is the AI Act that states what we can do, the way we can do, and what we can't do as well.
So you just spoke about the existing regulation in relation to cloud computing protecting states, not technologies, with the exception of AI. Do you think this is a good approach?
Honestly, no. I think that it will evolve. It will definitely evolve because of many things. The first thing is that the cloud, by definition, is not geographically well defined. We know that, well, we can request to have a data center located in the US, located in Singapore, in Australia, in Germany, because of, I would say, specific constraints, but it is today a case-by-case approach. So, for example, we can imagine that all the defense market will request to have a locally based, so within the given state and country, locally based cloud computing and data center. But that's not as simple as that, because a data center without any software, without any application that comes from other suppliers, relying on the other country-based companies, will not operate. So yes, there is a need to have an harmonized approach on the cloud computing, taking into consideration, and that's something very specific to, that will be in that case very specific to cloud, what are the typical threats that the cloud computing is exposed to. So having a kind of threat-led approach to define those regulations would be, to me, the right way to go, and the right way to be sure that this kind of regulation could be applicable, not taking into consideration only what a local state or local given country will need to define, but more having a joint approach, taking again into consideration globally the risk, but the risk based on the threats, the specific threats that is that the cloud specific implementation can suffer from.
Could you outline what some of those threats might be?
Yes, for example, the cloud is by definition public. You can access to it from nearly everywhere, which means that one of the most, I will not call that efficient, but one of the most common threat is the deny of service for a specific application. And because it is directly exposed to the internet, the number of bad actors is quite huge. It's quite huge, means that you have to prevent yourself being attacked by a very big number of bad actors at the same time. This is not the case when you are operating in a private LAN, where you know more or less how many endpoints will be connected to it, so you can very easily define what would be your trigger or acceptance level with regards to the number of requests. On cloud, you can't. On the cloud, you can only define a rule that says, okay, above 1 million of users connected on my platform, connected on my store, on my web store, I will stop the communication and will not allow anyone to connect anymore on the platform, any new end user. The problem is that when you have said that, you are in a very static way. Static way means that you could prevent for doing more business, because you have put a threshold saying that this threshold is to protect. But at the end of the day, you don't really know. So you have to look after all the specific threats, like the number of potential people that will attack you. And another one is the fact that I would say more or less the web-based application rely on 2 or 3 software communities. If I take the well-known example of Apache, Apache is in most of the web server, not to say all of them. Someone maybe a little bit more hidden behind, but we know that Apache by default is not a weakness, but if you have a big vulnerability that affects Apaches, you have to be very reactive to fix it, which means that one of your specific threats is the fact that you could be attacked 1 minute after a dedicated vulnerability has been announced publicly. So that is a very big threat. Again, just 2 examples, the number of potential bad actors, and how quick could I be attacked on a specific vulnerability identified, and the need to be very reactive. So having, and then we can complement that with a specific best practice implementation, and to say a recent example of the big issue that the world has suffered from, unfortunately, an update of an antivirus. It was in September. I will not give any name there, but everyone knows it. We know how sensitive the world is, because relying on massively on the networks in general. One single misuse or issues during the delivery of a software, even if it is normally something well driven, could have a massive effect. So this is a kind of domino effect, a single and very teeny at the end of the story, a very teeny event can be largely amplified across the world because of the number of connected elements using the same kind of software, etc., etc.
I suspect for you and for others involved in cybersecurity and cloud computing, it was probably both not a surprise to see how critical infrastructure can be affected, but also at the same time probably quite a shock to just see how connected everything is, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is really a domino effect that were until recently then not seen. The previous vulnerabilities didn't have, or vulnerabilities or weaknesses or bugs didn't have such kind of huge and very quick effect.
So why don't we then talk about best practices? What are some best practices you can share, Vincent?
Some of there is many best practices, and we could spend, I would say, hours to speak about it. To me, the first things that is not limited to one specific vertical segment or a specific technology is the culture. To ensure that each and every organization do have the well approach with regards to the cybersecurity, not just the technical approach, which is definitely not the right way to go, but having kind of overarching approach, saying, okay, I know that I'm exposed to a given number of risks. I need to identify them. I need to understand my specific landscape, so my specific threats, and then I will protect myself using equipment, firewall, etc., whatever. To me, again, best practice is to put in the head of the CX level of these enterprises and organization the fact that there is a risk. It's a well-known risk today with concrete examples, and they need to change their mindset, not just to consider the cybersecurity as a cost. Yes, there is a cost associated to that, but to balance the cost with the effect of an attack, with the effect of the exploit of threat, etc., etc. And today, the best practice is really to induce this kind of mindset within the organization, and then to move ahead, to deliver, to nominate people, to put in place a dedicated organization, a dedicated governance. That's something very important, not influenced by a CFO, by a CIO that have different priorities. And today, that's not a given. Definitely not a given. If we look at, I would say, the average organizations, most of the time the CISO, so the guy in charge of the security, is within the CIO team, which is contradictory. This is not the same goal. This is not the same objective. And in some cases, there is I would say, a contradiction between the expectation of the security and the expectation on the infrastructure of the network. So having a right understanding that they need to be separate is also a best practice. Now, and again, this is what usually I say to my C-level. When there is a decision to be taken, they have to be taken, obviously, by the CX level. That's obvious. Still, this CX level must entirely give confidence in the team that has been nominated to operate the cybersecurity. That is generally experts, so they have to be entitled as experts and to be reliable for that. And then comes the technology. So those guys will advise them to follow that kind of practice, to train the people. Training is one of the best practices as well to apply. Train the people, and not only technical people, but all the people. If we think about one of the major threats that affects nearly 100% of the organization, so the phishing attack, with many ways to operate now, and very easy to get result, unfortunately. Be sure that all the people in an organization are trained on what are the mechanisms, how they could be contacted using a phishing methodology to get information. Let them understand that they are not necessarily, even if they don't manipulate sensitive data, they can be a part of a big attack, and a teeny part, but mandatory part, to get, I would say, basic information. To their knowledge, not sensitive, but at the end of the day, yes, that could be. So ensuring that all the employees, all the people, and all the ecosystem, so if I expand that to the fact that organizations are not standalone, not anymore, so they rely on supplier, etc., etc. So include all this training in the whole supply chain of an organization. People working for the organization, enterprises delivering product, and at the end of the day, also the end customers, because that we are all part of a supply chain, and we need to ensure that this whole supply chain is at the same level of understanding of the risk. So I would say this is very high level, but if the organization would apply these three recommendations, we would be in a safer place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a key takeaway to always bring with you that people are at the heart of any organization, and because of that, there can be security risks. Before we wrap up, Vincent, is there anything else you want to mention to our listeners?
Apart from applying those best practices again, and to kind of having a wrap up, not considering the fact that cybersecurity is a technical topic, it's not. It's really a topic of huge importance when we are operating a company. It has to be taken at the highest level in terms of knowledge, understanding of the risk, understanding of what it means, what this risk means. There is not only business risk, there is cyber risk, and they are very similar. So we can any company can go bankruptcy if they are affected and not being able to pay for ransomware or whatsoever. So it's really to be taken at the highest level in terms of priority, and then of course balancing the risk, etc., etc. So escaping from a pure techie topic to a real business topic, and really to ensure that this is understood as is.
I think that's a really good note to end on. So thank you so much, Vincent, for joining me.
Thanks to you.
IoT Unplugged.